I'm Véra. I'm Véra Kempf, the co-founder of Singulart, an online art gallery that I co-founded 4 years ago now. And I'm really happy to welcoming you all to this first ever public webinar that we are organizing to close the year of 2020, which has been quite intense, I must say. And that's really something we wanted to do here at Singulart, because we observed so many changes in the art world this year that we wanted to take time to reflect on all these changes and also how artists, but also more generally speaking, how the art community lived this year. So that's really the core reason of organizing this webinar. So I'm super glad that we have three amazing speakers with us today. I'm going to present them briefly. And I really want to say that I discovered them during this year. So for me, it's kind of everything coming into a circle, that I was honored that they accepted our invitation to be with us today. And I really hope for you who are listening that the conversation will also help you to reflect on this year. Like every of us, whether you are in the art world or not, whether you are an artist or not, 2020 was challenging. So I do hope that this conversation will help you also to understand what was continuity in 2020, what would have happened anyway, and what is really specific to the fact that we lived under specific circumstances. And maybe at the end, we'll see also what we'll keep from 2020 into 2021. So briefly, really to present you our speakers. So actually, my team here at Singulart is quite fan of podcasts. So this is something I kind of discovered this year as well. During the lockdown, we were exchanging some good references like, oh, did you know this podcast? I should really recommend you this podcast for your weekend or for tonight. And this is also how I got to really dig into that new medium, and I found it really interesting. This is how I discovered the two podcasts that we're going to talk about today, the one of Laura and the one of Marie-Stéphanie. Marie-Stéphanie is a journalist currently working at Elle, which is also the founder of Femmes d'Art, which means women in art in French, which is both like a club, a podcast, an Instagram account, and also a website with news, really with the aim to bring visibility, more visibility to women working in the art world, being them entrepreneurs, artists, working in museums, etc. So I discovered her podcast, and I had the great pleasure to be interviewed by Marie-Stéphanie earlier this year. And she also curated a collection for our collectors on Singulart. So I'm really happy that you could join today, Marie-Stéphanie. Thanks for joining. I know you're gonna have to leave a little bit sooner, so I hope
I'm sorry, but I'm really happy to be here too. Thanks again for the invitation.
You're welcome. Laura, so it's another podcast that, well, you're not just only the podcast, but this is how I get to discover you. So Ask an Artist is a very interesting podcast, especially for me as the co-founder of an online art gallery. I find it really interesting, really to put myself in an artist's shoes and really understand what are the questions that artists might ask themselves. And I never thought they would ask themselves these questions. So that was really, I was really enthusiastic to be able to better understand artists through your podcast. You're also an artist yourself, but I'm sure you'll be able to tell us a bit more throughout the webinar and the questions.
Yeah, I look forward to that.
Thank you. And you're connected from the UK. Matthew, you also connected from the UK. I'm based in Paris, and Marie-Stéphanie as well, just to mention also we tend to forget, as we're all online, that, yeah, we are not located in the same place. That's the beauty of being online. Matthew Burrows, you're an artist, recognized artist, and also the founder of Artist Support Pledge, which probably many of the people in the audience know. I got to discover the initiative during the first lockdown, and I was so happy that I could find the man behind the initiative. When I wanted to do this webinar, I wondered, okay, what are the big initiatives that I observed this year? And many of our UK artists did participate, and I saw the hashtag Artist Support Pledge a lot on their socials. It had a huge impact internationally, and probably you'll tell us that you didn't expect that at the very beginning, so that was more of a surprise, but I'm sure that there are reasons behind it. And this is also one thing that I find really interesting in your three initiatives, is that the three of you kind of started your initiatives just before 2020 or because of 2020, and that's all the events of the year pushed your idea forward, or you had to adapt, but also probably brought a lot of success that you didn't necessarily expect so fast for the three of your initiatives. And this is something I definitely want to discuss with you throughout the webinar, because your initiative have something to do with community. And we'll definitely talk about how this global pandemic, the fact that we are all in our homes, made it really important for us to connect in other ways than the traditional way we were used to. So 2020, it's a big topic. I don't expect us to be exhaustive in our discussion today. Again, it's more to reflect on what to keep for the next year. I think one of the big things for the art world was that exhibitions were canceled, fairs were canceled. So all these events where we usually gather in the traditional art world couldn't happen. We were all in our homes, and we had to find ways to connect with each other, for artists to connect with their audience, but also to make sales, probably to sell their art. We couldn't meet in the traditional way. Do you agree that 2020 challenged the art world of yesterday? The one that was where everything had to go through more institutions, and that it opened another way for the, another way and another paradigm for the art world in 2021. Matthew, do you want to start answering that philosophical question?
I was just writing that down, so I remembered it. Absolutely. I mean, I think, I set up our support pledge really in a response to that, because it felt at the beginning, when lockdown started to happen in the UK, there was a sort of global sense of united despair in a way. Nobody knew what to do. There was a sort of a sense of loss. And I think, at that point, what usually happens in our culture is systems are brought into place to solve problems. And we live in a sort of system, a culture of systems, whether that's the state, governments, institutions, whatever else. But they're slow, and they're not particularly responsive or agile systems. They're good en masse. They're not very good at dealing with immediate effects rapidly. And what I chose to do really was to think about community, because community is really agile, because community values travel across communities quickly, very rapidly. And today we have the advantage of having all these global communities through social media. So I think that gave an opportunity to change the way we thought about the world we lived in. So the challenge that, in a way, that the art world faced was the fact that our usual systems stopped working. They just stopped. It's as if someone just turned the off button. And that gave opportunity for us to think differently. So I think that was it was sort of an exciting opportunity, really. I didn't really see it like that. I saw it as, here's a problem, what do we do to solve it? And I've always felt that the strength of the arts is not the value that art creates in auction houses, or the the prestige of artworks in museums. It's about the connectivity of communities, groups of artists who work together, support one another, often through very difficult, challenging times, financially or emotionally or intellectually. And they do that for a lifetime, often without any external support from the systems of the world. And that's a huge, I think, always thought a very, it's almost like a sort of a huge energy source that we rarely think of tapping into. And when we do, we sort of do it sort of apologetically, as if it doesn't really matter. But I actually think it's the other way around. I think that's the source of everything. That is the source that drives the arts. That is the source that drives artists to do what they do. And our systems are there to serve it, not the other way around. And I think sometimes we act like the systems, we serve the system, and the system's there to serve the community. And I think that in a way, what I was able to do was to put the community in the center of it all and highlight it, and to say, these are that community's values, and to give that community a voice.
Yeah. And Laura, thank you very much, Matthew. Maybe you can quickly summarize your initiative in one sentence, because I'm not sure everyone remembers, especially people in France. I should have done that, but you will do it much better than I do.
You want me to summarize, Matthew, to summarize the artist support pledge, or me to talk?
No, sorry, no, Matthew, but as an artist, Laura, you also did participate in the artist support pledge. So I was also interested to get your point of view as, how
I did indeed. Yes. So the artist support pledge. Well, I with Matthew sitting here, I feel he should really summarize how it works. So Matthew, do you want to just explain it now?
Yeah, very simply. The idea is that you post images of your work, artists or makers, on Instagram for sale for no more than £200 or €200. And you pledge that when you reach £1,000 or €1,000 worth of sales, to buy another artist's work for up to £200 or €200. So it's a means of actually generating income for yourself, but also supporting your peers and your colleagues.
So yes, I have indeed embraced the artist support pledge, and I owe a lot of our sort of business survival to this scheme. It really has helped me over the year, but it's also, the genius of it is that it has given me something to focus on, to make prints that are affordable, which has given access to a lot of people to my work, but also for me to be able to produce a product that says a lot about me and the quality of how I make, and distribute it far more widely, and feed back into the arts community with money that I've earned to move that on. So it's a genius scheme, and it's been key for my business this year.
And Laura, would you say also that 2020 brought you from traditional channels to more new ones, innovative ones you would have never considered before? Absolutely.
I think when we went into lockdown, first of all, the feeling was one of shock. And I felt very strongly that kind of how I responded to it was going to be very telling. I felt almost like I would be judged on my response to this lockdown. And my first thought was to engage with people and to reach out and just offer something on a regular basis. So I started inviting people into my studio. I thought everybody is trapped in their homes, they can't go anywhere, all the regular channels are shut. So my approach was, well, I'm making a print, come and join me for a few minutes every day, and I'll tell you how I do it. And you can watch the print grow, and you can just check in for 5 minutes every day. And that was fantastically successful, and I didn't really think it through. I was sort of holding an iPhone in front of me, filming what I was doing. It was very primitive. And it sort of grew from there. But as well on the podcast, you know, we were very concerned to show that there was still things happening in terms of how we were responding to things, and we were trying to be as helpful as possible. You know, sort of the remit of the podcast is to help people who want to make money from their art and become artists. So we were very keen to be honest about how we were responding, and that it wasn't all, you know, going smoothly necessarily, but these were the options that we were taking, and to share that. And so I mean, my business has moved more or less online now at the moment, and I'm doing a lot more through YouTube and producing series of educational videos that are free at source at YouTube and things like that. So it's been a great change from what I would normally do.
Yeah, it's also interesting that you're using the word being, like the feeling you needed it to be helpful. This is something also very important, I guess, that the three of you got the feeling, almost a mission that, okay, I have an initiative. What can I do with it to be helpful during this critical time, being it to the artist community, or more generally speaking, to the world in a way. Marie-Stéphanie, how did you react? Like, first lockdown, like, did you see Femmes d'Art, Women in Art, as a tool that you could do something?
Yes, absolutely. The first lockdown was like a real opportunity for Femmes d'Art, because I think at that time, people really wanted to, you know, slow down. We all wanted to cook, to take time to read, to learn some new things, and people wanted also to have more time to get in touch with each other, because we were all in our houses alone, and we really wanted to hear from the backgrounds and the stories of all these women who are so inspiring. So I think the first lockdown was a real opportunity for that, because I saw the community really becoming really big and grow every day, and also the podcast, because it's not only the podcast, but as you said, it's also the Instagram page. And so yeah, it was a real opportunity, and I received so many messages from people telling me thank you, because I feel as an artist or as a gallerist so lonely during that time. We can't do anything, we're stuck at home. Thank you to share all these stories. And it was like I don't know, a moment of joy for them, because I think it helped a lot of people who were listening to Femmes d'Art to see something at the end of that crisis, and to dream, to have a little hope that this world would be soon a new world, or the same, I don't know, that we are going to be free. And so I think it helped people a lot. And I'm really glad of that, because that really was the goal of Femmes d'Art from the beginning, being able to share all these stories of artists, gallerists, art critic, curator, and people like you running an online art gallery. So yeah, I think it was really, really positive.
And Matthew, Laura, as artists, because Marie-Stéphanie mentioned this feeling of loneliness that we had, and also the fact that so many other activities that we are doing in the non-COVID world, we cannot do them. So do you think as artists that also your status and your role in society like took importance because people realized that when you're at home, art is so essential. I know this notion might differ from one country to another, depending on what shops are open or not. But I had this feeling myself that suddenly people realize how art, culture in general, help us survive these moments of loneliness. As artists, did you feel that specific change?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the advantages that artists have is they're well practiced at doing this. I spend all of my working life, all my life really, working in conditions of uncertainty and living with a sense of ambiguity and having to sort of really analyze what my values are. Whereas I think for a lot of people, if they're in normal sort of industries, if you like, that is sort of given to them because of the nature of the industry. And when that's taken away and when suddenly they don't have that every day, that can leave a sort of a vacuum, sort of a hole to fill. So I think in a way, artists sort of stepped up at that point. And that's why I think it wasn't just visual arts. We saw that across the whole of the arts, this sense that artists felt, we're used to the isolation, we're used to the solitude, we're used to not knowing, not having a kind of sense of security and certainty over everything. And I think in a way has been our role for forever. So I think we were well positioned to deal with it. And I didn't really ever really doubt that. It was more a matter of what do you do?
And the society changed, the look or the perception from society did change towards you? Did you experiment?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, my experience of not, running our support pledge and developing that, I was obviously getting an awful lot of feedback from artists and makers across the world. But I started getting as much feedback from observers and buyers and people who weren't artists themselves, but were participating or just observing it and watching it, because they understood that there was another way to be community. There was another way to connect with other human beings. There was another way to be economic that didn't have to rely on sort of systems in a way. It could rely on values, values that bind communities. And I built our support pledge around systems around the idea of values rather than a system. So there's no central system to our support pledge. It's just a set of values that people buy into by doing it. They become part of its community and part of its behavior and its customs and the values that it lives and works by. By doing that and by sharing that, it becomes an effective way to live, to cover your needs and to cover your needs both financially, but also in terms of your sort of intellectual and emotional needs and sense of well-being, connecting to other people with other values or values like your own.
Yeah, you're right. Probably artists were well equipped to survive lockdown more than many of us. But you probably, because you become so important and you played that role, that you opened horizons and perspectives to many people. Yeah, that yes, something was possible. Laura, on your side, did you also get feedback that?
Yeah, I did. I think that when we went into lockdown, there was a lot of bored people who wanted to try new things. And printmaking does seem to be kind of one of those things that people want to have a go at, especially lino cut, because it's sort of seen as a kind of gateway process into printmaking, which indeed it is. And it's sort of simplest. It is very, very basic. And what I did by showing people how I use lino cut was to both show its accessibility, but also to show it as a more, I hesitate to say the word fine art process, but the way that I work is very responsive, and it's, my plans change all the time, and it's quite a creative way of printing. And what I found was that people came along to have a go at lino cut, but I also got people who had no interest in making lino cut, but became fascinated by the process And, you know, I had people who loved the printing press because it's a big metal machine and it's quite exciting. And I had people who had no idea that you could even do that with printing. And so by doing this sort of daily little filming and just talking about the technicalities of stuff, it kind of drew people in. And one of the things that I'm very proud of now is when I see people on Instagram and they say, oh, I watched Laura's film and I had a go at painting my picture onto the liner with a brush and cutting around that, or I had a go at making my inks transparent. And I'm really proud of the fact that the community around this sort of little enterprise of mine to do these films has really built. And I've done live streams as well. And now you look and you can see conversations by people who came to me, but have now gone off and are talking to each other and stuff like that. And that's been amazing. I'm really pleased with how that has worked.
Yeah, definitely. This idea of community is like building a community is something definitely that we will remember from 2020. And Marie-Stéphanie, maybe before you have to leave, what would you say are the main changes you observed in the, let's say, traditional art world at the end of the year? Like what do you see changed and will remain, do you think? Or
A lot of things.
Like
I think
probably something questions people started to ask in 2020 that they didn't really care before, and probably this will stay.
I think a lot of things had changed or are changing. There's a lot of the reflection in the art world from the museum, the institution, a lot of things that were already changing. But 2020 was like a big accelerator for the changes, and one of them is, to me, the digital and the use of the digital, because a lot of institutions, galleries, traditional institutions were not very keen on using the digital and using social medias, and I think it was now it is a real change for them, because as we saw in 2020, we had the digital fair, the digital exhibition, the viewing rooms, newsletters, art galleries having an account on social medias, which for some of them has been really new. So I think this is part of what is changing right now, and 2020 was a real accelerator for these changes. Also, maybe the place of the art. I mean, not only visual arts, but all the arts and culture in people's lives, because as we were saying, people really want to have more art now in their lives, because we experienced such a critic situation, a real crisis. We were at home alone, and then we had time to think about what we need, what we want, and what is important for us. And I think a lot of people realize that art has a real big part in our lives, not only for the feelings we have when we see a piece of art, but also because it says a lot of things. Artists are giving, I think, their visions of the world, the actual world. And it's so important. It has an historic part, I think, which is really important. So to me, it's the second change. And the third change to me is the place for more inclusion and diversity, which is a subject you're going to talk about just after I'm leaving you. But yeah, to me, it's a real big change, which is not new. It's not 2022 who changes everything. It was not new, but I think as well, 2020 was an accelerator because of a lot of things, because of the time we had to think about what we want and what we want to see in the art world, because it's again a reflection of our work, of our world, of our culture, of a reflection of what we want to see in our history books, in our art history books also. And because of all of what happened during this year, I mean, in the United States with George Floyd, in France with all the movements, feminist movements, it's sort of accelerator as well for more inclusion, more diversity in the art world. And I think institutions are really thinking about how they can now make it possible for their collection to be more representative of the diversity of the female artists. And yeah, I think it's really moving from now.
Let's hope indeed that we will keep this positive thinking in 2021. Thank you, Marie-Stéphanie, again for joining. The participants in the webinar will have access will be able to follow you through Instagram and your podcast. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Véra.
Matthew and Laura, that's a question I actually wanted to ask, because at Singulart we realized, and I feel artists are observers and players of our contemporary society. So the way they perceive the world and how they react to the news is something that we can definitely see in some of the artworks that we present on Singulart, for instance. Would you say that your art, specifically in the themes that you are discussing in your art, did 2020 also change something in really the themes, or in some techniques, or because you reacted to what you were currently living? Or, as you were saying, Matthew, because being in isolation is part of the artistic process anyway, that didn't reflect so much?
No, it has for me, certainly. I mean, I was already on that track before kind of COVID set in, really. For a long time, for years, I've been thinking about kind of pre-industrial cultures and sort of the value systems they worked under, partly because I was trying to find a way of thinking about our relationship to nature. And one of the things that really, I suppose, I'm really interested in, both as an artist, as a person, but also within our support pledges, under what conditions do we most thrive? And I mean that in terms of the whole of nature, not kind of human beings and wild nature separated out as if culture and nature are two different things, but looking at the whole system as a whole and saying, okay, under what conditions does our nature thrive? And I've always looked at that in a complete system in terms of, well, okay, that means the values we live by, it means the work practice we have, it means the way we value one another, the way we value ourselves, the way we value the landscape in which we live. All these things are intricately interconnected. And I've been kind of working on thinking about how do I manifest that visually in art for a very long time. And our support pledge really grew out of that. It grew out of those sort of value systems, saying that actually, well, there are ways of valuing ourselves and one another that are not about being hyper competitive and about being exclusive and about prestige, but are actually about supporting one another and sharing and actually being community, not community that's kind of defined by institutions, but genuine communities that are born out of people's shared experience and shared values. And that's been something that I've been really passionate about for a very long time. So our support pledge kind of grew out of those ideas. And over the time of the lockdown, because that became increasingly heightened because of COVID-19, because obviously I was very much at the center of dealing with that as an issue, it did have quite a big impact on my work, and it sort of accelerated those issues within my work. I was already doing that, but I was very aware that it almost gave me the confidence to sort of stand up and say, this is what matters. This is what matters to me. And look, I've made that presence in the world. Doing our support pledge in a way was putting into the world my values and saying, look, this is what I believe in, and this is what humanity have practiced for millions of years. And actually our current systems are only a very tiny little slither at the very end of that period of time. And it hasn't created a particularly equal and environmentally sustainable world.
Thank you, Matthew. Laura, would you also say that you like the theme that you're currently working on, or you worked on in 2020? Is there a continuity with what you are doing and just accelerated?
Well, I would say that for me, it's not so much the subject of what I've been doing. I mean, I work with rural landscape. My focus is really on sort of space and distance and emptiness. But what changed a lot over this year was because I was building this sort of visual communication with more and more people, it became very important to me to experiment and to push things. So I've been trying to be very experimental this year and try pushing my own boundaries and things, because I think it's important as if you're going to watch an artist make something, to see the process of the thinking and how there is this bedrock of skills. I mean, printmaking is sort of a craft-led process, and I'm very proud of that craft basis and of the sort of skills you need to function as a printmaker to turn out a print. So it was good to showcase the kind of diligence that goes into acquiring those skills, and also to show that you could take risks and not everything would pay off, but you can really sort of adapt and change. And also sort of having that accessibility to discuss my ideas and my thinking, and the way that as I develop a print, to be able to say in film 1, I'm going to do this, and by film 15, it's something completely different because I've just totally changed my mind, and that's okay. Which kind of happens. I've noticed over the year that I do that all the time, which I wasn't aware of. But having, I think this year for me as an artist has been all about really sharing that communication. This is exactly the ink I'm using. These are the papers I'm using. This is what I'm doing. And there's an enormous freedom to that. And I think when I started doing this, a lot of my artist contemporaries would sort of say, oh yeah, but you tell people things. And is that a good idea? Should you be telling people about your process and stuff? And actually, what I find is kind of the more I tell people, the more respect they have for my work and the more interest they have. And yes, they may go and use those processes, but they're not going on the same journey as I am with them. And frankly, if someone wants to take the process and replicate what I'm doing, they're not going to do it as well. So, I don't feel that. So yes, for me, I'm still dealing with empty landscapes, but I really feel that this year has changed intrinsically how I think about how I make those landscapes and how they're produced and the way that I work.
Yeah, you're mentioning experimenting, and everything we've discussed before is about how 2020 challenges to adapt. And I think adapting is one of the greatest things that humanity can do. Like 2020 proved us that we have this ability to adapt. And in many cases, and this is also something that I wanted to highlight with your initiatives, is that we innovated. Like we were pushed to innovate, and you both mentioned taking risks, going out of your comfort zone, going out of what you were usually making, or if you were alone in in the studio before every day. Now you have this community that you are in relation with almost every day, I would say. This is something different that maybe you wouldn't have felt comfortable doing before under other circumstances. So this I found also very interesting. And both a podcast and something related to social media involves a lot of technology. And for people outside of the art world, it might feel like, wow, during the year, the art world really embraced much more technology. I must say that 4 years ago, when we started building Singulart, like many people were telling me, like, how can you possibly purchase a piece without seeing it? I guess in 2021, no one will wonder again. But as artists and as founder of these two initiatives, podcast and a big movement that has that's using social media to expand, would you say that your relation and also the relation of the art world with technology has really shifted, and what will stay maybe also for you?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I was a very basic user of social media when I set up our support pledge, but I recognized that it was a tool that I could use. And I think one of the problems that sometimes we have is we kind of elevate technology as if it's somehow it's leading the way and we're following it. And I think actually technology is at its most useful when we apply good values to it. If we just follow the technology, then we're just limited by its processes. So in a way, I didn't need to have a really sophisticated understanding technology to do our support pledge and social media. I just needed a rudimentary understanding of it. What I needed to understand was what values I was applying to it. And I think in a way, that's why our support pledge worked. I mean, I then had to find out the technical stuff because I was getting asked questions every day. So I had to learn very quickly. But I think in a way, what the art world then had to take on, technology to do what it used to do without it. I think what will come out of that is, as we go back to sort of real world activities, I think we will and hope we will see a kind of return to seeing, art in the flesh, because that's the real experience of seeing art. But I think that what social media and the internet have enabled us to do is to create a broader breadth of accessibility to the arts. And I think that is to be welcomed, because it's allowed people to experiment with showing their work, selling their work, and buying work. So it's not just about the artist, it's also about the collector. Collectors don't just fall out of a tree fully formed. They develop their taste, they develop their sensibility, and they test it out. And they need, I think, for the collectors of the future, they need environments where they can test that out without feeling like they're being judged or that they're getting it wrong. And I think things like online and social media based platforms allow that. And also because, especially in our support pledge, the prices are low enough that people can take a risk, and it's not a huge risk. I think it's more unlikely if you start going into the hundreds of thousands brackets that will happen. So I do think what we'll end up with, what is already happening, I think, is a much more broader art world where we have different dimensions to its economy, rather than just the sort of the mainstream large scale art fairs. We will see lots of different approaches to showing work, buying work, talking about work. And I think that's to be welcome, because that gives agility to the artist, agency to the artist, and accessibility to the artist and the buyer. And I think that's good.
I would actually absolutely agree with Matthew about the kind of range that social media has given over this year to art buyers and people who want to experience art. And perhaps there are a lot of people who have been forced online by lockdown and suddenly find that they're in a place where not only can they find art to look at, but they can connect with the maker, and they can have a conversation or a dialogue or an observation about how art is made, and then they can buy a piece. And the kind of beauty of Matthew's Artist Support Pledge, as he says, is that it gives a very affordable way in for a lot of people who perhaps would never have gone into a gallery or gone to an art fair. And certainly that's been my experience. And also for artists, there is this massive, I mean, we could be anywhere in the world, and there is this massive connection throughout the world. And I noticed sort of radically changed this year for me, my audience, it's sort of grown in the States enormously, particularly. So I think there is that, and people are becoming a lot more accepting of the fact that they can buy art online. But I still think, as Matthew does, it's not the same on a screen as when you actually physically have the art. So I am looking forward to that changing and to going back to galleries, but I don't think we will lose ground in online communication, online sales. But I also think that people want to make a connection when so much shopping now is online, clickety click, and then somebody comes and drops it off. The real special part of buying is to have a relationship. So, you know, if you're trapped in lockdown, to actually have a relationship with the artist you're buying from is a big deal. So that's something I think which has changed, and that kind of bypasses a lot of having to go somewhere and having to go into a gallery, having to go into a show, something like that. So I think going forward, it's possible that even when the show's open and the gallery's open and fantastic and we're all back out there, people will still expect there to be a way of reaching the maker or engaging with the maker's story. In fact, I hope that's the case, because I feel much more heard as an artist now because of that. Sort of, I've opened the window on that world, as many artists have, and now people are coming in and experiencing what I do.
Interesting. So you feel heard much more as an artist. I do agree that as lockdown was a global experience, I would say we're all equal in the fact that we had to experiment that, whatever our job. So we experimented that, and we wanted also to see what it feels to be locked down when you have this job and when you have this job. And so what it is for an artist, I think it's also out of curiosity and for everyone to know how was an artist in living under lockdown. Probably it gives perspective to people. Okay, creativity is helping artists survive this lockdown. How do I myself to survive my own lockdown? So I feel it's interesting. You mentioned also that your community was quite diverse, coming from various parts of the world. And so indeed, we experimented that at Singulart very rapidly. Our community of collectors and artists grew very much internationally. And maybe one last theme that we can discuss is how 2020 might shift, or did you experiment a shift in terms of how 2020 in the art world deals with diversity? Do you think there were actions that brought more diversity into the art world? We discussed the fact that more channels were open, and not only the traditional one. That's also one way of seeing diversity. Do you see other ways that 2020 might have changed the relation of diversity to the art world?
Absolutely. I mean, I think on a number of levels, I think our institutions in the arts are having to adapt and having to think about how they represent the arts and artists and arts communities. But I think there's something more important than that, actually, because I think what 2020 has shown in a way is that artists and their community can actually take some level of control. And those communities can have a voice, and they don't have to be reliant on institutions and the gatekeepers of those institutions. That those institutions change is important, but it isn't the thing that makes the change. What makes the change are the values of the community, because those systems only come to represent those values and only come to represent those communities eventually. So we have to, it's in our power to make those changes. I think it's sometimes, I think the danger in all of this is that we rely on the institutions to make the change. I think that's a dangerous thing to do. I think they will make the change if we change, because they will eventually have to serve us. So I think that it's important that we understand where the change is made and that we are all then responsible for that. And I think one of the things that I did right at the beginning with our support pledge, which now I realized was so important, was I made sure that it was for everybody, that there was no discrimination on any level, whether that would be where you were from, your ethnicity, your gender, or your level of experience. So you could be a student or an amateur artist and you can use it. You could be, a professional, and it didn't matter. It was everybody in it together, the whole of the community, the whole of the arts community, supporting all of its ecosystem. It wasn't siloed off into little specialist groups of the elite or the emerging or the training or the amateur, whatever. It was, okay, here's all of us supporting one another in this giant permaculture, that if we do it correctly, and if we all understand that on every level, we need each other, we're all going to be better off. And I think, if I've done anything with our support pledge, that is the thing I want to leave behind. That's what I want to be its legacy. That it's created this giant economy is great. Don't get me wrong, I'm kind of, pleased with that. But actually, if that's all it is, then that could go tomorrow and that's that. I think really what's important is that it's proved that an economy is part of a broader set of conversations. And I think Laura said something earlier about, 2020 really has been about conversations. And I think that's it for me. I think the fact that we've all been able to have this conversation and that we've been able to talk about things that we couldn't talk about before, or we felt shy about talking about, or it wasn't the done thing. I couldn't have done our support pledge 2 years ago. It wouldn't have been acceptable to do it. But I think because of the situation we were in, everybody's willing to give something a go. And then because we all gave it a go, we all realized actually it was worth giving it a go. It wasn't so bad, and that we could all benefit from saying it's okay for it to be not exclusive. It's okay for it to look a little wild. It's okay for it to not be perfect. And the art world, and I, like any artist, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's done it. We do that naturally. We like to make things look perfect. We like to make things look like it's better than something else. And there's a place for that. But also I think there's a much broader place, a much bigger place for saying you're all welcome.
Absolutely. I think when I set up the podcast Ask an Artist, which I do with fellow artist Peter Keegan, who's a portrait painter, we very much had the remit of making it a podcast about it being something, the entry into the art world, not having to go through sort of major institutions or jump particular fences. We wanted to keep everything kind of very low key and offer realistic small steps for people to grow their art business, things like that. So I think over this year, there has been a real change in the accessibility. I mean, not just the podcast, but in society, because suddenly we're seeing the great institutions and suddenly we're looking into people's living rooms it's like when I remember watching a news correspondent on the BBC and he's got something propped on his ironing board because he has to talk to us. And I think perhaps this year has given us a chance to see that those great institutions are not quite the perfect, scary beasts that we all think they are. Perhaps now we can think, well, actually, do you know what? I'm just like them. I'm sitting at home in my sitting room. He's sitting at home in his sitting room. There's no huge difference. And I would like to think that that has maybe given people more encouragement just to get on and do things. And that in itself is more inclusive. And certainly on the podcast, we're always sort of keen to say, well, try and have a go and ask the questions and do the experiments. And we're all just doing the best we can. You know, I think it's been very good this year in that a lot of things have been rubbish and haven't worked. And we've all been victims of technology, and we've all been victims of our circumstances. So those kind of things that have been rubbish and difficult and disappointing, in a way, are a freedom, because it frees you up to see that things aren't perfect, that things haven't been going along perfectly, that you're not the person on the outside of the system looking at a system that's chugging along very nicely without you, thank you very much, and you can just stay on the outside. Perhaps now it's a much more inclusive feel that actually you can just jump in there and you don't have to come from a certain school or go to be accepted by a certain place or what have you. You can actually just strike forward and join in on your own. I mean, that's what I would like to think this year, with so many terrible things, has given us that little bit of inclusivity that we can all just have a go.
That's a very positive message. If we summarize it it gives opportunity for people to be who they are, and more inclusivity, because we realize we can be who we are because there is so much diversity, and it brought more authenticity. So that's a very positive message.
So. I really hope that is the case, because I think, you know, with some of the things that have happened this year and the Black Lives Movement, there has been a feeling with some institutions that they've all scurried to box tick, and that they've all sort of, and that's great, you know, it's fantastic that changes have been made, but making changes to appear to be acceptable is very different from people really changing their views and it being a real shift in mentality, not just what do we need to do to look right. And so I think there is a big difference there. So I would hope that actually it's more of a mental shift that's happening rather than everybody's just sort of doing the right thing, if you see what I mean.
I would like to conclude with that very positive thinking, really. Thank you very much, Laura and Matthew and Marie-Stephanie. We only have 1 minute left, so I really want to thank also the audience. I really hope everyone will have one takeaway from this conversation that will make them positive in order to go into 2021. And I also want to thank, of course, the speakers for joining us and having so deep thinking and thoughts around this topic. You, like the audience, will receive an email with the recorded session. And we will also invite you, because this is, I say it again, the first webinar that we're doing at Singulart. We hope it's the beginning of a series to illustrate the world, like the creativity there is in the world, and what creativity can bring to the world. That's a message we really want to convey with Singulart. So we're even changing our baseline into the world of creativity. And to celebrate that, we selected a few pieces of our artists reacting to the news of 2020. So we made a selection of 15 pieces, because we really do think that artists are part of society and observe it and react to it. So this is what we want to show. So we will also send to the audience a link in order to choose the artwork of the year to illustrate 2020. So I really thank everyone in advance for participating. And I really want to thank 50 people who followed us today and participating in this webinar. I wish you all happy holidays and a nice switch in 2021.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.